A few hours ago, I uploaded a video entitled The Top 10 Scars That Should Have Got Reposes. Well, it turns out that most of those scars didn't get reposes because some idiot at Activision was too busy reposing Jetvac over and over again. So now we're left here with 9 iterations of Jetvac rather than having getting multiple versions of much more deserving scars that featured on that list, mind you. Regardless, one of my previous top 10s was celebrating the top 10 greatest scars reposes, mind you. And whilst it's definitely great to appreciate what we have, it's also great to theorize about what could have been. So naturally, this list is going to be looking at scars which have reposes already, and yet still haven't reached their full potential for how awesome their design could be executed in a figurine format. So these are the scars deserving of even further reposes from what they have already. Naturally meaning that any scar that was exempt from the previous list are the ones that qualify for this one. So any scar with a light core iteration, a supercharger iteration, or an elite or a series 2, 3, or 4 qualify for this list, since those are poses that are different to their original core designs, mind you. Regardless, the list is of course based upon how much difference could be made from the repose of a scar that already exists to yet another repose of a figurine, how much potential that posing could have, and above all, how much I would have loved to see certain scars return for a third or fourth time, so on and so forth. And of course, for characters with unrivaled potential that I want to see time and time again, of ones that are going to make it very high up on the list. So, spoiler alert, Jetvac does not make it onto the list, mind you, which is why I assembled this shot of all of them before you. So without further ado, we're going to roll the intro and then get into the top 10 countdown. I was really stuck for a 10th place spot on the list right here, so a quick honourable mention goes to none other than Zoop, purely because he once again has a lot of potential for another repose, despite the fact that he has 3 iterations already, because of course he can create bamboo walls or mushroom walls depending on which path you take, or even cacti walls, and either way, these walls could have been incorporated into the base to create a really detailed figurine, maybe with Zook's weapon slightly volleyed upwards, even more so than his elite form, in order to showcase that he's about to fire a volley shot over said bamboo or cacti or mushrooms, and this would have just showcased this character's gameplay a whole lot more and could have created a really detailed figurine. But unfortunately, Zook isn't really my favourite character when it comes to the Skylanders franchise. He's easily within my bottom 100 favourite Skylanders, actually. So naturally, seeing this guy return would have been a huge disappointment, especially when there are much better Skylanders to take his place, such as Flameslinger. Now, Flameslinger is an absolute fan favourite, and it's easy to see why. He has a mix of range and speed, which are some really awesome things to have from a Skylander. Unfortunately, his repose potential isn't as great as Skylanders that come in on this list. In fact, it's not even as great as Zook, which is why he literally just barely beats out Zook to get the 10th place spot on the list right here, because of the fact that he's just a better Skylander, and I would have loved to see him return more, because seeing more gameplay out of this character in future games would have been something really cool to explore, and getting an additional WoW power as well would have also been something really nice to see. Or better yet, a light core effect, allowing his bow, or at least the arrows from his bow, mind you, to light on up and really create that fire-based aesthetic. At number 9 on the list, we have Whamshell. Now, it's really disappointing that this figurine was given a light core rather than a repose, because we never got to see a WoW power for this character, which could have been so awesome. Since his soul gem is quite disappointing, all it does is give him increased armor and some cool new aesthetics upon his back, which isn't even explored in the light core figurine, so getting to see that new armor, and so we have a comparison between the original pose that has no armor on it, and then a pose from the very end of the upgrade chamber with the armor on it would have created a really sharp contrast and really expanded upon the base design we have here. And not to mention, we could have had a really visual wow power, because this character isn't too impressive visually. Like, you shoot starfish and whack a maze at enemies, you know, it's kind of generic in terms of his animation. So getting a wow power ability that could have been overpowered and visual could have and more visual even, could have really added this guy's gameplay. And again, a repose would have made it so that then we would have a figurine which showed off the start of the upgrade chamber, and then a figurine which showed off the very end of it. And it's not exactly like there's any shortage of positionings for Wamshell's mace. He easily could have had it to his left and then hold on to it with a single hand, a bit like how Zoop handles his bazooka right here. Coming in at number 8 is Chill, far from a fan favourite, so I'm sure a lot of people would have definitely been put off by the fact of this character returning once again, but in my personal opinion, I think she's a great Skylander. Once again, a great range of melee and ranged attacks to create overall a really well-rounded, really fun Skylander to play as, and also a Skylander that could have had several different poses to really execute her design in very unique ways. She could have had new armor, different colored armors. She could have had a really upgraded ice javelin. I mean, like, going from here to here isn't that much of an evolution, so we could have had that expanded upon even greater, because Blizzard Chill, let's be honest here, whilst her shield and her mace, not her mace, her javelin, Whamshell's got my tongue, but regardless, they aren't that much of an evolution from the original design. So with there being so much more potential for an expansion, and the fact that this is a personal favourite Skylander of mine, means that Chill is worthy of number 8 spot on the list right here. So seeing a series 3 Chill would have been pretty awesome, to say the least. At number 7, we have Prison Break, yet another character that's far from being a fan favourite. Apparently, a lot of people don't like this Skylander, and it's hard to see why, because he has such creative gameplay elements, with his lasers being diverted by the crystals at certain angles requiring strategy, and he also has some really creative wow powers, such as a mega laser which activates whilst you're firing your regular laser, mind you, and even that can be reflected by his crystals, creating for a mega beam that can hit 9 enemies at once and deal 200 damage to all of them. It's OP and truly fantastic. Then there's the Series 3 iteration, which when you fire your lasers into the crystals, it carves a statue of Prison Break himself. What I'm saying here is that this character has no shortage of creativity woven into his gameplay, so seeing another wow power could have created for something really visually unique and stunning, and it could have even made a lot of people change their minds towards Prison Break and start to appreciate him more for the creativity he displays. Not to mention, being a rock golem means that you can position him in several different ways. Like, look at the Series 2 Prison Break, for example, which showcases off both paths very, very well from his upgrade chamber, and creates a really stark contrast with the original Prison Break, since it shows the very end of his upgrade chamber in comparison to the very beginning of it. And his crystals could have easily been different colours, like what Hyper Beam Prison Break explored. So what I'm saying here is that all of these ideas could have really been expanded upon for one final pose to create an amazing wow pow, an amazing pose, and to bring back a Skylander which many people might not have liked before, but a 4th series could have really made them warm up to him all the same. And once again, he's a personal favourite of mine for all of the reasons above, so that alone elevates Prison Break to number 7 on the list right here. Chop Chop right here is an absolute fan favourite, so a lot of you are no doubt thinking, well, it's about time he showed up, and I agree with you. Chop Chop has so much potential because he's a knight, so you could give him all sorts of different armours, different coloured armours, and you could even give him different weapons. I mean, like, he's had a sword 3 times around now, why not give him something like a lance for an additional iteration or something along those lines, mind you? So the expansion you could make upon this original design is, of course, limitless, and he's an absolute fan favourite, so I'm sure nobody would have been opposed to the fact of him returning. Nobody except me, on the other hand, because I, for one, find this character overrated. Yes, I said it, deal with it. I personally think that Chop Chop's gameplay is pretty underwhelming, so I definitely feel as though a fourth series iteration could have brought in a WoW power that could have made Chop Chop win me over much more than what these additions do. And not to mention, I feel as though for Twin Blade Chop Chop is a bit of a letdown and a disappointment because all they did is give him dual wielded swords, whereas for Series 2 Chop Chop had a really unique design with it exploring his design potential down both paths with a shield that you can acquire down the shield path and the sword which you acquire down the sword path. So that's a very unique expansion upon the design, and once again creates a really stark contrast between the start and the end of the upgrade chamber. Or better yet, this character didn't even need a WoW power, I'm sure, for a lot of people, because he's OP as it is in his Series 1 iteration, so maybe a Light Core could have worked out really well with a lit-up shield and a lit-up lance, as I've just told you guys about, so that could have also been a really awesome pose. Ultimately, the only reason why this Skylander is as low on the list as he is because he's just not as he's not as much of a favourite to me personally, mind you, as other Skylanders popping up on the list. So I would have liked to have seen them return additionally much more than this character, and that's just how it goes with these lists. It just so happens to be based on my own personal opinion, mind you. Number 2 is Countdown. Now, Countdown is one of those Skylanders that changes a lot throughout the whole of his upgrade chamber, so a Series 2 iteration could have shown a lot between his start of the upgrade chamber and the very end, especially when it comes to his rocket arms. He could have had a giant rocket arm and maybe even his little mini minions on his base to go alongside him to create a really detailed, really glorious looking figurine. Of course, this would be very hard to do because having a giant rocket hand would make the figure very top-heavy, so that raises questions as to how they would balance out the figurine, and who knows, maybe that's the only reason why he didn't return in Trap Team. But regardless, a WoW Power could have also been really awesome to see because he's a bomb, and of course bombs can create all sorts of different explosions and combinations and chain reactions of explosions, so his WoW Power potential once again is through the roof and limitless. So seeing a reposed version of this figurine with his little minions, because of course that would add a cuteness factor, and everybody loves themselves a cute return of a Skylander, mind you, and it could have also just expanded upon this original design even more gloriously than what the Light Core iteration did when they decided to repose this original iteration for a second time within the same game, mind you. So yes, Countdown, one of my personal favourites, and definitely a character that has a lot of potential for an additional repose on top of the Light Core that we already got. Bumble Blast right here is at number 4 for very similar reasons to Countdown, because the end of his upgrade chamber gives him a lot of very different aesthetics to the start of his figurine, because he has a beehive backpack at the very end of his upgrade chamber, which of course the Light Core edition really failed to capture, because the Light Cores are based upon the start of Skylanders upgrade chambers just like the original cores are. So seeing an expansion upon this design to where you can see the beginning and the end of his upgrade chamber explored in 2 different figurines would have been really cool to see. They could have added so much detail to this character, especially with his wooden armor. They could have gave him some really big shoulder pads maybe. They could have upgraded his bazooka so it had the triple B shots. There's just so much they could have done with repos for this Skylander, and it's so unfortunate that we never got to see that, because Bumble Blast is a really overpowered and unique Skylander in the fact that of course he can attack enemies from all directions without even facing them, because his bees have the lock and on ability, and then his honey increases the power for bees and slows down enemies, making it so that you're constantly using all of his attacks rather than just one, so that just makes you feel more involved with the game. So once again, just returning to this design and seeing maybe a really visual based WoW Power could have really added a lot to this guy's gameplay, and it would have been so great to have seen an additional pose with this character on top of one we already got in his Light Core iteration. Again, same as Countdown. We needed another pose of Drobo for one reason. He's OP, so introducing an OP Skylander to every single Skylanders game would make it so that then, people are constantly collecting this Skylander. They have several versions of him, so that then when one ultimately bites the bullet, the other one can jump in and take their place. And It's not like the Repose itself is limited on for repos and potential, because despite being a dragon, Drobot is a robot dragon, so of course they could give him new robot aesthetics, they could give him new patterns upon his wings, maybe even a new coloured suit. So there's definitely a lot of potential within for Repos, and just seeing this character return in future games with even more unique and exciting WoW powers, because again, he's a robot dragon, there's no limiting what kind of WoW powers they could create for him, either on a power scale or on a visual level. Either way, that would have been amazing. And because this Skylander wasn't introduced until, well, after Trap Team, this Skylander didn't get any further introductions, is what I'm saying here. So Skylanders fans that were from Superchargers onwards maybe missed out on such an OP character, so seeing him in future iterations would have, of course, introduced new fans to the concept of an easy mode. So Drobo being an absolute fan favourite, his OPness in game and the usefulness there just means that he would have been a perfect asset to any Skylanders game as a Repose, and unfortunately it just wasn't meant to be, and the Drobo iterations finished with his mini in Trap Team, but even before that it finished in Giants when he only had a Light Core and a Series 2 to boot, and no variants either, so I would have loved a Repose Drobot, so that then we could have even saw a potential variant out of it, because as the saying goes, where is a legendary Drobot when you need him? And that saying is of course one common within a legendary lock if you were to perform one of those, because Drobot is useful in any lock, so whenever you're using a lock where Drobot isn't available, the hope then becomes that your next lock will in fact include Drobot, thanks to his OPness. A lot of people question as to why Spyro didn't get a Repose and Trap Team whilst Pop Fizz did, and Spyro was stuck with a mini. In fact, he was completely neglected altogether from Superchargers onwards, and that's a huge shock considering that Spyro was the poster boy for Skylanders for the first 3 games, mind you. He's what kept people coming back, especially the OG Spyro fans. When it comes to the Spyro's Adventure Dragons, he is one of only 2 of them that got that 3rd iteration within Swap Force. The other one would be Whirlwind. So, not seeing a 4th series is ultimately just really disappointing, because it didn't carry over those original dragon designs from Spyro's Adventure into the newer games. And ultimately, Skylanders just felt like it was missing something whenever Spyro wasn't introduced in the new game, because he became such a staple for this franchise and became such an iconic inclusion. So if that alone should have gave him additional reposes, and not to mention, once again, he is a dragon with unlimited amounts of potential for reposes, mind you, because you could change up his horns even more than what the Mega Ram does, which, to be honest, the Mega Ram is definitely a perfect expansion upon this original Spyro design, really adding a lot of increased detail even to his wings and the shape they take, of course his tail and his horns, but it could have been even more detailed there, maybe additional scales, even more added to the wings, like what the Series 2 Spyro attempted, a further expansion upon that. So I definitely would have loved to see this character return, especially over characters like Jetvac, who got their appearance time and time again. So it really is a true shame that such an iconic Skylander was just thrown out the window by the time Trap Team rolled around, practically. But this list is as predictable as ever, because the number 1 spot goes to my favourite Skylander Ignitor, naturally meaning that of course I wanted to see more of him. First of all, a Repose could have made him a dual wielder, just like with Chop Chop. He could have got even more additional armour pieces, such as shoulder pads, leg pads. He could have got a different coloured armour, maybe a red and black one, or maybe that could have been an additional variant based on his Repose, mind you. So the fact that he's a chunk of armor just means that there's unlimited potential for reposes, and he could have also had a really awesome WoW power, because the Series 2 iteration really goes overboard on the fire theming, so an expansion upon that WoW power to make this guy even more fiery and destructive could have been something really, really cool to reintroduce to Skylanders from Swap Force onward. And not to mention, when it comes to Eruptor, who was of course chosen for a Series 3 iteration of Swap Force over Igniter, he can only pose a orb with arms so many times, naturally meaning that Igniter would have been the better choice here because he has way more repose potential than what Eruptor ever had. He's a much better Skarner than what Eruptor ever was and ever will be. And he even has a lot of potential for a light core effect, which again would have been much greater than Eruptor's exploration in Giants, because of course he has a fiery soul that is contained within his armor, so creating a light core effect that really makes that symbolism stand out could have added so much to this Skarner's design and expanded upon it in so many unique and awesome ways. So again, it's such a shame that we never got to see any of that. In fact, Igniter did have an original pose for a Series 1 iteration that was too big to fit in the box. So with different packaging styles, you know, they could have returned to this repose. It's not exactly like it would have been too difficult to come up with additional poses. In fact, you didn't even need to go with a jeweled wielding idea. You could have had Igniter's sword slash into his base, a bit similar to Crypt King's sword, how that's slashed into his base as well, just to give him a huge sense of victory, just like his Series 2 iteration does, which would have brought further personality to the character, which I would have just loved to have seen, with him being my favourite Skarner. But my rambling for how much I love Igniter is indeed coming to an end, and as is the video. So I want to apologise that these videos were 2 days late. As per the norm, my Wi-Fi decided to cut out just as I went to go and upload the original video, and whilst the original video wasn't uploading and I couldn't delete it, my storage space was completely full, so I was unable to record this one. Regardless, I will see you guys next Thursday for another top 10, and until that moment arises, peace!